This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Streaming December 12th on Peacock. Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie are back.
That's hot. Loves it.
For a show-stopping reunion that will prove putting on an opera is anything but simple.
We're really good at this.
One thing's for sure, they won't be upstaged.
Good to have you back. Come on, we've got a show to do.
Paris and Nicole, The Encore, a 3-part reunion special, streaming December 12th, only on Peacock.
Hello and welcome to the Malick Hour, a celebration of the life and work of American filmmaker Terrence Malick. Hello everybody and welcome to the Malick Hour. This is a subsection of Writers on Film dedicated to the work of Terrence Malick, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Jeremy Arnold, and we're going to be covering Terrence Malick's third feature film, The Thin Red Line. Jeremy is a writer of numerous books. We talked to him last about appropriately enough, his book about Christmas movies, which is obviously still available. And I'm delighted to have you with me, Jeremy. And you wanted specifically to talk about The Thin Red Line.
Yes. Thanks for having me, John, so much. It's always a pleasure to talk movies with you. And I did want to do The Thin Red Line because it's a film that really affects me deeply and I find moving on so many levels. It's probably my favorite Malick film. Although, to be honest, I haven't seen all of his most recent ones. But I also wrote about this film a little bit for the revised edition of Janine Basinger's book, The World War II Combat Film. 20 years ago, she asked me to update the filmography appendix to include all the combat movies that had been made since the book was originally published. And so I had every combat movie made in the 80s and 90s. And also I was very familiar with the genre from before that. And so The Thin Red Line in that context just created an even newer level of fascination in the way that it uses the genre and the trappings of the genre.
It is a very strange film, even though... And I think that strangeness is kind of highlighted by the fact that it came out the same year that there was a resurgence of interest in the Second World War film, mainly sparked by, of course, Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. And there is this odd pairing of Steven Spielberg and Terrence Malick. They both had the same agent in Mike Medavoy at the beginning of their careers. They were both reviewed by Pauline Kael. Sugarland Express and Badlands was a double review in which, unfortunately, Terrence Malick came out off the worst, and Sugarland Express which is a strange view, because I would argue that these days Sugarland Express isn't really very highly regarded, as his first film. I think most people would look to Duel and then skip Sugarland Express and go straight to Jaws. And then in 1998, when Terrence Malick comes back to filmmaking after a long gap, he's making a war film. He's dealing with a situation, and he's going to be compared to Steven Spielberg all over again.
Yeah, I've always thought that it was unfortunate. The Thin Red Line followed Saving Private Ryan into theaters by 6 months or so. Because, as you say, there hadn't been many combat films made in the preceding decade, very few actually, and so for a lot of people, it was new again. And Saving Private Ryan is, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, it's a very traditional combat film. It really is of a piece with the genre as it had existed for many decades. The Thin Red Line it has different intentions overall. It's not trying to do the same thing that Saving Private Ryan does. And so the issue, I think, was that audiences were sort of primed for this sort of surface level thrill and action and horror of combat to be the story. But Malick, of course, doesn't treat that as the story. It's just a framework for his real story, which is an exploration of man's place in nature and man in the context of animals and wildlife and earth, wind, water, fire, and the emotions that humans experience and where they come from. These kinds of philosophical questions are the heart of the Thin Red Line. That's not the case in Saving Private Ryan. What they have in common is they do both have very riveting combat sequences, great action, very powerful and convincing. They're just using them in very different ways. And so I think audiences were very frustrated when the combat in Thin Red Line would stop for half an hour for something else entirely to take over the film.
I think it's really interesting in the piece that you wrote for Janine Basinger and her book that specifically about Thin Red Line, that you say that it does what a combat film does. It has sections which are entirely fitting with the sort of procedure of a combat film, and this is one of those things that you could take out the sequence of, say, the attack of the pillbox or the and there is a sense that the geography and the tactics, the strategies, the way the men are moving forward, all of those things are very conventional, very much part of a convention. It does those things very, very well. But as you say, they're embedded in a broader view and a broader story, which you don't see that often.
Yes, as Janine writes so brilliantly in that book, the combat film, as it formed in the 1940s, it settled on the main three conventions of the combat film. The main three ingredients are a hero, a group, and an objective. That is the sort of core, the spine of really every movie that you would call a combat film. And there are also generic conventions like a dedication to duty, the pressures of command, the conflict between individual initiative and following orders. And then there are also story elements like mail call or getting a Dear John letter, which are very old conventions in war movies, and they do pop up in the Thin Red Line. And for those of us who've seen a lot of war movies, that sort of creates a framework. It makes us accept the film as a combat film, and hopefully, if one allows the film to do this, allow the film to take us to a different place, a deeper place, an exploration of the fear and other emotions that are underlying all these sorts of scenes that we're used to seeing in other war movies that don't necessarily stress the fear to the same degree that Malick does.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting in terms of the contrast with Saving Private Ryan, where the tag of that movie was, the mission is a man. And in this film, in the Thin Red Line, the mission is man. You just take out the article, and you've kind of got the same idea. The mission is what is happening. The mission is life, and how are we going through this particular episode of it? In the context of his career, this film is coming after Badlands and Days of Heaven, both films which were made in the 70s, 74 and 78. Both films were moderately successful, but by no means blockbusters. Both films gained in critical reputation over the years, but again, when they came out, they were not universally praised. None of Malick's films ever have been. They've usually gained in reputation, and accumulatively his whole body of work has. But then there's this gap of 20 years between 1978 Days of Heaven being released and 1998. I'm really interested in you going to see this film, and what were your perceptions of Terrence Malick before you did, and how were you excited about this, or did you not know about Malick particularly? What was your context?
Well, I was a student in university at Wesleyan University in the late 80s and early 90s. And I saw Badlands and Days of Heaven there for the first time. And Malick was this sort of mythical, legendary figure to all of us students and fans of his films. He made these amazing, brilliant films in the 70s, and that was 15 years earlier at that point. So where was he? What happened to him? He was alive. He was out there. He was this amazing filmmaker who wasn't making films. What was going on? And we had no information on him. So he just was sort of mythic. And we didn't think that we'd ever hear from him again, much less see another film. And then in the mid 90s, I started to hear reports, Terrence Malick is making another film. It's something in the South Pacific. It's a war movie. And then all these movie stars you read in the trades are going down there for a couple of weeks at a time, major, major stars. And it was so intriguing. And I was so excited to see what he was going to do in the war genre. So, yeah, I was very much tuned in to the fact that this was happening. And I just couldn't wait to see it. And, as a lot of people were saying, Terrence Malick making a war movie, this is bizarre. It's totally different. It is actually not an atypical Malick film at all. I think it was actually inevitable that he would make a combat film, even though it seems so unlikely, because what is war but mass-scale organized violence, sanctioned violence? And that's a difference from the first two films, in which he also is exploring violence, but not in that context. And so it seems very natural to me that an artist who's interested in those sorts of themes would want to grow and expand to a bigger canvas in all ways, which The Thin Red Line does. Its running time, its budget, its scale, its production schedule, its cast and stars involved. On every single level, it's just a bigger version of Badlands and Days of Heavens in terms of exploring violence among humans. And he uses that as a way to pose these questions. What does war do to a man? Why do we fight wars? Where does this instinct come from? Where does love come from? Is also posed in the film. It comes down to primal emotions and primal states. That's why this film is so affecting to me, I think, because I feel that a primal element so strongly. But of course, the questions he's asking they're all essentially the same question, and they're all unanswerable. And I was thinking today that that's a reason The Thin Red Line, to me, is endlessly rewatchable despite its long running time, because we can never quite figure out the answers to these questions. And so we get pulled in every time. This might be a bit of a stretch, but it's the same way I feel about Lawrence of Arabia being rewatchable, even though it's almost 4 hours long. It's because we can never figure out this T.E. Lawrence character. He's so enigmatic and contradictory, and things don't make sense, but we're drawn to trying to figure him out. So every time I see that film, I think, all right, now I'm gonna pay attention even more to this and that detail, and I'm gonna figure him out, and it never works.
And both characters as well, but both feature central characters that are, philosophical to some degree and thoughtful. and seem to have a very keen sensitivity to the people around them, but are also, violent and in the midst of violent action, and that seems to be where they want to be. I mean, just one of the details, Private Witt wants a rifle. He doesn't want to carry stretchers. His Christ-like compassion goes to some degree, but at the same time, he wants to be beside his company fighting.
Yeah, maybe it's not so much that he wants to be with them fighting, but just to be with them.
Yes.
And to be with them while they're in combat, while they're going out on these missions and, in such great danger, rather than being the stretcher bearer who comes in more after the fact. Because, yeah, he's such a great character, very Christ-like, and he emanates such peace and calm. And a lot of that we project onto him simply because Malick will hold shots on his face for endless, numbers of seconds, and other characters too. God, there's that one shot of Nick Nolte just sitting there staring, which it's probably 30, 40, 50 seconds long. It's slightly intercut with something at the camp. But, at a certain point, you think as an audience, okay, I'm now looking at Jim Caviezel, or I'm looking at Nick Nolte, and this is going on a long time. And you start to form a different relationship with the image and our relationship to viewing this image. And I think Malick is just allowing us to pose our own questions. Why is, he, as he's sitting there looking out, what is he thinking? We know a little bit about, I'm talking about Nick Nolte. We know a little bit about his personal story from the voiceover on the ship, but for the most part, he seems so out of touch with the kind of humanity that is at the heart of the rest of the film. And we become observers. It's, this movie, Janine Basinger once said that every movie ever made is a complicated mixture of subjectivity and objectivity, which is true. And in this film, we have sequences where we are aligned with the men as they're carrying out their mission, for instance. But overall, it's an objective approach. We're observing all of these characters and this environment in the context of one another, and the questions that are posed. It's like the story pulls way back from what we're looking at, so we can look at it all at the same time and think about these questions that the voiceovers are asking.
I love what you said earlier about this being an extension of Malick's work and not actually that different from there's no real break. There is a line you can delineate that attaches them to Badlands and Days of Heaven. They're all period films. They're all films that are very American. They're about the American experience. I mean, I like to think that you see the end of Days of Heaven. You see Abby Brooke Adams' character, get on the train with some soldiers who are going off to the First World War, and then the next Malick film, it's soldiers arriving in the Second World War, and so it's almost as if, mate, was he really thinking that at the time that he was already going to? But there's he was always in love with James Jones and this particular novel, Thin Red Line. So this was a project that he had nurtured for a long time. A pair of producers who were crediting themselves with bringing him out of retirement to do this. There was a long preparation. I just to go back a little and say about my own sort of reception of Malick. I had seen his first films on television. And they were introduced in a British TV show called Moviedrome, which was hosted by Alex Cox, the film director. And he would do a little intro. And so the first knowledge I ever had of Malick was him doing this intro, which was basically, and you can actually find it on the internet now. And he talks about where is Terrence Malick? Is he high on drugs somewhere? Or is he doing this? Is he doing that? And his sort of response is, maybe he just got sick of Hollywood. And who wouldn't? That, good luck to him is sort of Alex Cox. Now, skip forward, 1998, I'm sitting watching The Thin Red Line in the theatre in Liverpool, London Road, Liverpool, Odeon. And the film finishes and everybody's streaming out. It's packed house. Everybody's streaming out. Alex Cox is in front of me as we're walking out of the cinema, and he's talking to his companion, who he's been seeing the film with, and complaining about the haircuts and how the haircuts are not period accurate. And so, in the process of writing the book, I email Alex Cox and I say, by the way, I email him because he saw Lantern Mills and I wanted to know more about that film. But I say in the process, by the way, I was behind you after Thin Red Line and you were complaining about the haircuts. And you're one to talk, with Walker, the film you directed, and all this. And he came back and was very funny about it. So anyway, my expectations of the Thin Red Line, I went to see this film several times at the theatre, and I had been a big fan of Saving Private Ryan, but this had something else. Saving Private Ryan felt like a roller coaster. It felt like you were going in for to be punched in the face, and it was exhilarating and horrifying. And initially I thought it was just horrifying, but then because I went a couple of times to see that film as well, I sat next to someone who laughed all the way through the opening sequence and saw it as a series of gags. Oh no, it didn't hit him. Oh no, it's got him.
Wow.
Yeah, not exactly. This guy was Serbian, and this was the 90s. So, Serbians at that point had a different attitude, perhaps, to violence. They were a little bit blacker in their sense of humor. But Thin Red Line, it didn't have that gee whizness about it that Saving Private Ryan had. It didn't have it didn't have that central character that we were going to follow and who was going to stand for us in the form of Tom Hanks. In fact, this was about a group of men. This was about an entire company. It's much more democratic in that. One of the things that made it very unconventional is that it starts with people trying to avoid war. The people are on a beach. You don't know quite where they are. You don't know what's going on. It's a good 10, 15 minutes before we're properly engaged in a military context.
Yeah, well, this is one of the first. This is a film of contrasts, and there are so many examples of powerful contrast that give the film its power, I think. And the first one is, yes, as you say, this opening sequence with Whit and the other soldier in this Melanesian little village on an island somewhere, and it's harmony, it's peace, it's humans living in the best way that they could. It's very idealized. It's full of light. It's very open. It's beautiful. It's like you'd want to go there on vacation. And after 10 minutes of that, we have this incredible cut to the inside of the ship's brig. And you couldn't get a more different environment. It's closed. There's no daylight. Everything's metal. There's no light. There's no joy. And that is really shocking on a visual level, on a sound level, everything. And there's also been a very elliptical cut to that. Just all of a sudden, like totally off screen, they were found, they were brought to the ship. I mean, it would have taken a long time for that to happen, but we don't see any of it. And so that just shows to me that Malick was going for that contrast, that visceral, very cinematic contrast. And that kind of sets the tone. It sets the stage for other contrasts in the film. There's such beauty of this film, even as it's showing horrible death and destruction. We see troops on the ship preparing for the beach landing. And yet there's this, in other movies, it might have been a little more visceral and matter of fact and showing the mechanics of what was happening. But no, we just get an interior meditative quality to it. And we start to hear voiceovers and we study these people's faces and we see and sense the fear that they're feeling. And we think about the fact that this would be an incredibly fear-inducing situation to be in. And that is sort of the prism through which we're looking at it. But the framework from the combat genre is there. Troops on a ship doing a beach landing, that's been in countless war movies. there's only one movie that comes close to the way this one does it, and that's Beach Red, the Cornell Wilde film from the 60s, which is sort of like a crude version of the Thin Red Line. It's very similar with the voiceovers. Getting a little out of sequence here. I was going to ask you about that later. I was curious if you know if Malick was familiar with that film or had maybe been inspired by it at all.
That's interesting. It's never, no, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know he isn't someone who I would consider an exhaustive cinephile into, not like a Martin Scorsese who would know about how his film fits in the 50 other films that have been made in that particular, you know. I there has been an earlier film with Jack Hawkins and Keir Dullea, the actor from 2001: A Space Odyssey, based on the James Jones novel Thin Red Line, which isn't actually that bad, and I actually think it's quite a good effort. You know, it doesn't have much of a budget, but Joan Didion said that its combat scenes were some of the best that she'd seen filmed. It struck me as a bit of a overstatement, but it's not a bad film. Very much based on that sort of the central conflict between the colonel and the captain that we get with Nick Nolte and Elias Koteas later on in the film. I think that there are definitely things in this opening sequence that are very closely related to the novel, and you know, you see a soldier stealing a pistol that he wants, and you see people arguing about you know, where to be wounded and things like that. But those sort of but they're also the whole AWOL part of the film that feels purely Malick. I don't think that's not in the novel, and it's and in fact the character of Wit is significantly different in the novel. I mean, Wit in the novel is kind of just a racist, you know. He's and the captain is Jewish, and Wit is, you know, anti-Semitic, and so there are lots of internal things that Malick has to some extent sort of, I'm not sure if it's straightened out or has just changed the direction of. One other thing that I was interested in with this jump that you talk about is you go from an island which is, you know, family, children, women, and you go to this place which is exclusively male, adult, and that's where we're going to be for much the rest of the film, in this very male, adult world. Having said that, there's a very complex idea of masculinity there as well. You know,
Yeah.
there's Malick, I don't feel, is afraid of the homoerotic in this film. And that's not something that you would necessarily be the first thing that you would think of with Malick, but those shots that you have of Jim Caviezel and his let's face it, his beautiful face, it is almost as if it's saying this guy is looking at the beauty and embracing the beauty, but also we're looking at him and we're embracing his beauty as spectators.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I agree with it. And I think that his scenes with Sean Penn are especially interesting in this regard because they vie with each other, they goad each other, they question each other relentlessly, and you really get the sense as these scenes go on through the film. There's what, 4 or 5 of them scattered through the film. You get the sense that Sean Penn, for all he's saying, you know, sort of mocking Wit for saying he sees the light in everything around him, you get the sense that he's kind of attracted to him. He almost wants to be him. He wishes he could, but he just can't understand it. And they're somehow very much drawn to each other. And it reaches a peak when, you know, Wit is dead and Sean Penn is standing over his grave and talking to him one last time, you know, and crying. He wipes tears from his eyes, and you really get the very strong sense that he had feelings for him. I don't mean, you know, sexual feelings. I just mean some kind of emotional pull towards this other man. And there's another example of contrast. The ways that these two characters look at the world, look at the war. It's presented to us to observe and come to our own conclusions about, really. And you're right about Jim Caviezel's face being so beautiful. And there's so many shots where Malick just holds on his face for so long. And, I was very fascinated by the stories I've heard of Adrian Brody, who claimed to think that he was going to be the main character in the whole film. And they shot hours and hours of footage of Adrian Brody that they just scrapped. And you could tell me more about why that change was made, but I just wondered if part of the reason was that Adrian Brody looks petrified in every single frame that he's in in the film. That's his look. Wiesel has this more of a blank slate that allows us to project so many other emotions and modes onto him. And I wonder if Malick just liked his face better and so wanted to make him the central focus.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case for that, and there's definitely a case for Malick often finds the film as he's making it. I find the Adrian Brody story implausible because they did a whole series of table reads. I've read the script. There is a couple of versions of the script, but the scripts are available on the internet. He didn't have that many lines. He's not that, the finished film and the script are not that different. And the novel is a choral. It's a choral work. It's about lots of different stories in the middle of a campaign. It is about the mission, not the man. It's about the men. So I don't see any. I think that's the publicist of Adrian Brody at an early point in his career beefing up his part, and then when he's disappointed that he's not in it as much, then that becomes the story that will maybe allay his embarrassment that he's not in it that much. I mean, there's a scene where they're in the river right near the end, and he's saying, "Oh, they're coming! The Japanese are coming! We've got to get away!" And he's with his arms and his physical movement, he's sort of squatting, talking to the sort of rather inept officer who's taken over, and he looks just like a petrified bird, and he looks like one of the cutaways that we've already had of like birds hanging in the trees and the fruit bats and things like that, and Adrian Brody looks exactly like that, and it's just like he's become part of the animal kingdom of a scared little creature who's going to have to scuttle off. I think weirdly Adrian Brody has quite a large physical presence in this film, even if he doesn't have a large presence in terms of his character speaking a lot or having scenes dedicated to himself. But as a particular color of paint in Malick's paint box, he is well used, and he is a significant part of the movie. But I'm absolutely sure you're right. Also, the part of wit is not a big part. And it becomes increasingly big as the process of editing the film and shooting the film goes on.
I really like your point about Adrian Brody being like a little animal of, a unique little scared animal, and that's what he represents. Because you're right, and every character or most of the characters, you could say that about. Who's the character? There's one soldier who sort of. I can't remember. Is a well-known actor. He sort of is like constantly yelling and going kind of crazy out in the field. In any event, my point is that this character, every time we see him, he's in a rage. And so there's another kind of animal, if you like. Elias Koteas, his gentleness, his gentle strength, his caring for his men, he's very unique that way. And it's all of a piece with what the film establishes at the beginning in that Melanesian village on the island. It's an almost anthropological look at them. And we're also getting looks at wildlife, the crocodile that opens the film, birds in the trees, owls, animals killing each other as well. And it just equates all of them. It equates the animals with the villagers and then with the soldiers and big movie stars, actors who we have no idea who they are. They're all equal in a sense.
That's an excellent point. And I think some of the things about the natural inhabitant in habitat. I think some of the criticism of the film was a little bit ignorant, to put it bluntly, because there was a sense that, yeah, Malick likes his he likes his landscapes. We get it. He likes you like your flowers and your sunlight and all this stuff, and so he would be criticized for like, oh, you see a injured bird during the artillery attack, or you see a snake in the grass coming towards the soldiers, and it was like as if you can't just throw in all these animals just because you like animals. But one of the major sources of casualties during the Guadalcanal campaign was snake bites. These were environments which, when the film begins with there is a war at the heart. What is this war at the heart of nature? That is not an airy fairy question. That is not some sort of abstract question. It's a question of life and death if you go to Australia, because things will try to kill you. Or if you go to Guadalcanal, things will try to kill you. You can't crawl through the grass and expect it to be made of silk. It isn't. It's made of spiders and snakes and things that will bite and harm you. And it looks beautiful, it looks great, but that is also the point of the paradise. You know, when you see that bird fluttering because it's been absolutely shocked and wounded by the artillery barrage, I mean, you can't help but look at those beautiful green hills and see them being pounded by that artillery and not feel for the hills, even though, you know, that doesn't make me any less humane, because I'm thinking, geez, those were nice hills that we've just blown up.
I think that's exactly right. It's the hills are also equivalent with the human characters and the animals and the elements that we see. It's all one. It's all one world. And this is like, how is it that mankind can do this sort of thing to this world? And where does that drive, that urge come from? One thing that what you just said made me think about was people complaining about, well, there's just wildlife and landscape shots and Malick likes them. Of course, that's not the reason that they're in the film. They actually have meaning to the film. But in order to feel that meaning, you've got to do what ideally you do with any movie that you sit down to watch, which is surrender to it, allow it to wash over you, allow it to do what it's trying to do on its own terms. Now, if it cheats, if it's not well made, if it's terribly acted, or something like that takes you out of it, then it's ruined. And a lot of movies, unfortunately, are like that. But this is a film that I just love surrendering myself to and letting it wash over me. And I get lost in the beautiful musical score by Hans Zimmer, which reflects and expresses just about everything you and I have been talking about in this conversation. Music enters us like no other art form. It just instantly goes to our hearts, to our souls, and that's how it works. And cinema, I think, aspires to the state of music. And when I surrender to the Thin Red Line, I'm surrendering to this fusion of image and music and voiceover, which is, in a sense, part of the soundtrack, part of the score, in a sense. And I just let it work on me, and it's very, very moving. There's a quote that I love by the Australian poet Gwen Harwood, which I first heard from Peter Weir, not personally, but he wrote about it or said it in an interview. And I have it taped on my wall, and it's one line of a poem, which is this: words can never say, as music can, the unsayable grace that leaps like light from mind to mind. And that seems to me a perfect description of cinema, because what are we looking at on the screen? We're looking at light, and it enters us as instantly and fully as music does. And so, yes, words can never have that quite same effect, although in The Thin Red Line, they approach having the same effect because, as I said, the voiceovers really feel like part of the music. So that's why I hold this film in such high regard. Also, it's beautifully crafted, impeccable production. I love the visual depth in every scene. The slow tracking camera through the grass and the reeds, and it's hypnotic. Um, and it also shows that Terrence Malick is an excellent director of action and suspense. The sequence where they take the pillbox is beautifully crafted. It's so exciting, it's riveting, and it's horrifying, but it's also breathtaking and riveting in the way combat sequences are. There's that paradox of watching war movies where we're thrilled by it, but we're also horrified by it. And that scene in itself, I mean, that's one of the best combat sequences I've seen, period. And I think you say in your book that he was joking around that he didn't even want to direct those scenes. He wanted to like bring in Rennie Harlin to direct them. I think he was, and he said it as a joke. But yeah.
There's a bit where he talks about the guy who's playing Private Doll, Dash Mihok, and he falls over and he's saying, "Oh yeah." He spoils the shot because he falls over, and he says, "Oh yeah, Dash wants to be Rambo today. He's trying too hard," and so like, I mean, that sequence is so incredible as well because of the idea that you see the sun sort of suddenly light up fields that you thought were already in sunlight, but they suddenly lighten the fields because a cloud has moved. And from one point of view, it's a beautiful grace note of cinematography. But from another point of view, oh no, the soldiers are now going to be much more visible as they go up towards the pillbox. And also, I mean, they're using this kind of crane that they use to create this sort of effect of being very close to the grass and very close to eye level. And I think it was Arthur Penn who said, Terry's never been in combat, but he really got that feeling of you don't want to put your head up. You want your face to be as close to the ground as possible and how scared you are. Final point about that sequence from me, you get the Chekhovian gun being used. The gun that Private Doll has stolen in the ship is used during that sequence as they kill the Japanese soldiers in the pillbox, and he sort of has kind of a psychotic episode of bravery. He just leaps out and starts shooting at them. And you also have that wonderful scene where him and Ben Chaplin are just hugging at the end of it. And again, you have this thing that, I mean, I think there's sometimes I mentioned earlier sort of homoeroticism. I don't want to push the erotic so much, not because I'm prudish or anything like that, but there is a masculine intimacy that doesn't have to necessarily be sexual or be leading towards the sexual. It can just be where it is. And that sort of physical intimacy and just men hugging each other and comforting each other. You have a similar situation by the river where Wit is washing a man and stroking his head, which is just so beautiful and delicate. And I think, I mean, you can look at it as homoerotic, and I've not got a problem with that. But it is this other thing as well of just male intimacy and compassion and affection that is being used, that is being portrayed, in this film, in the midst of violence and carnage and cruelty.
Right, exactly. It's saying we as humans are capable of this beauty and tenderness and compassion, and also this incredible violence and death and destruction in the same person. The same people are capable of both. There's another moment that really resonated when I watched the film again the other day, which ties into this, which is the scene where Woody Harrelson dies.
Oh, I was going to mention, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Unbelievably powerful scene. One of the best pieces of acting I've ever seen from Woody Harrelson, I would say. And what really struck me this time was Jim Caviezel as Wit is kneeling over him and he's trying to comfort him. But it's clear that Woody Harrelson is about to die. And there's this long cross-cutting between Caviezel and Harrelson, and Harrelson's "I'm cold, I'm freezing," and they put a blanket over him, and the end is moments away. And then we just hold on Caviezel's face. And the moment of Harrelson's actual death is off screen. And we know it happens when Jim Caviezel's face, he starts to form a very faint smile. It's like this smile of peace and love and understanding and compassion all mixed into one, but mainly peace is what I get from it. And it's almost like he's seen the beauty in Harrelson's death. There's Harrelson's on a spiritual level, it's a beautiful moment, I guess. And that comes across entirely through a shot of Jim Caviezel that is held for I don't know how many seconds, a very long time. Anyway, it really struck me that that was an incredibly imaginative way to show Harrelson's death by not really showing it in a way.
Yeah, and he says to him as well, you didn't let your brothers down.
Yes.
We would all be dead. So he kind of blesses him. He kind of gives him his last rites. Not in
Yeah, that's
any,
true.
not in any
Yeah.
conventional way, but he sees him off. You didn't let your brothers down. You did what you had to do, and those moments, we see they're like vignettes in the film. We see the captain refuse an order which would send his men to his death, and essentially that's his career done. He's gonna go back under a cloud now. You see Sean Penn run out under fire purely to give morphine to a man who is going to die. So you just have these vignettes of moments. I want to go on to towards the end of the film. After they take the pillbox, they go into the Japanese sort of bivouac area. So it's behind the lines, and they attack it. And they're kind of, for the first time, they're on the front foot. And you've already had a sense of immediately after the pillbox that the Japanese actually get a voice, because you have this wonderful speech of the Japanese soldiers. He's embedded in the earth saying, you think I wasn't loved? You think I wasn't honored? And it didn't save me, and you think it will save you, and it's just in a moment that is breathtaking in its ability to make you realize that this war is appalling. The attack in the bivouac, I think, is an absolute masterpiece of editing from a film point of view. It's breathtaking how many reactions and feelings and emotions you go through in such a short period of time, and in what ostensibly is an action sequence, but actually, to my mind, is a complete and radical subversion of the politics and the poetics of what an action sequence should be.
Yeah, which is a great description of the Thin Red Line overall and what it's doing, how it subverts the combat genre. It shows on the surface traditional elements of these kinds of films, but it gives us something entirely different from what we usually get from those types of scenes in other films. And Malick just, as the film goes on, he just does it over and over again with different variables, different whether it's two characters in the frame interacting, whether it's taking the pillbox, whether it's the action scene you just mentioned. Um, it, it- we there's this sort of overarching objective and mournful tone that underscores all of the above. Um, and not to get off on a tangent too much, but this makes me think of the score by Hans Zimmer and how I understand there's a piece of music in the film that I think is called The Unanswered Question.
Mm.
And in one of the featurettes on the Blu-ray, there's a little interview with Hans Zimmer, and he said that Malick asked him to write him a score in which the music was asking questions.
Mm.
And so Zimmer was like trying to figure out exactly what that meant and how to do it. And I think he really succeeded because the music is it's beautiful, it's melodic, it's otherworldly. It shifts in sort of strange but beautiful ways. And it does ask questions. it's my favorite score of Hans Zimmer. I actually listen to it regularly. But that's just me. Yeah.
I also, yeah, the unanswered question is Charles Ives, which is, I mean, there's lots of
That's
pieces
it.
of music which are used with the score. I know Hans Zimmer was a little bit sort of miffed that he wrote much, 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 much more score than was eventually used in the movie, but that was typical of Terrence Malick's ask for any composer. There is an interesting thing about that whole sequence as well is that they're in the dust. They're in the fog before they go in there, and there
Yeah.
is elements of the soundtrack that are being used, and you can't tell if they're the soundtrack or if it's like bullets whizzing past you. And it one other thing I wanted to come back a little bit to the voiceover which we've already talked about has this sort of choral effect. And I mentioned earlier the Japanese voice, and it's kind of funny that that's actually not a Japanese person doing the voice. It's actually Elias Codes doing putting on. I'm not sure if that would be acceptable necessarily these days, but reading and that actually those lines are actually from an unused play that Malick wrote for Sancho the Bailiff. But a lot of people a lot of the voiceover is not the character you think it is. A lot of the voiceover that you assume is wit is actually coming from a character that you see in the film. You see him talking to Sean Penn at the very beginning and saying, "I'm not going to die in this. This war's not going to get me. Not going to get you either." And Malick just liked his voice, and he's kind of basically a non-actor who this was his first and maybe only role, and he got talking to him because he had made a mistake during the filming and was very apologetic and thought he was going to be fired essentially. And Malick invited him, said, "No, no, 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 come down, let's have dinner." And they had dinner. Asked him about his life, and so when they came to record the voiceovers, a lot of stuff he sort of used from his life as well, and a lot of stuff in the dialogue with the Sean Penn is actually him saying, "I used to sleep with the hogs," and that sort of thing was actually coming out of his own experience of his tough upbringing. And this all has this sort of thematic effect of we are all part of one soul. You know, does it matter if the voice is connected to this person or this person or this person? And similarly, by the end, we have Whit's grave, and then the company march past the other graves, the graves which are now have now become almost officially, it's an official war cemetery now. So quickly do these things happen.
Oh yes, I agree with all of that. It's so true. And I first of all, I want to thank you for writing about this in your book because I only learned that this actor John D. Smith, who plays Private Train, was the voice that that we hear at the beginning and end and throughout the film. I had, like everyone else, I had always assumed it was Jim Caviezel's voice because they're both Southern accents.
Mm.
Although I had wondered, well, Jim Caviezel's accent isn't quite as strong as on the voiceover, but it must be him. Um, so it's, I think also by having that voiceover, those sections of the voiceover be from an actor who's unknown and not from a major star whose voice we recognize, that helps. If we, when we're hearing Sean Penn and Nick Nolte's voiceovers, which are not disassociated from their characters, so we know it's them, but we're still very aware, oh, I'm listening to Sean Penn and Nick Nolte, and we're aware of that as we're listening to it. But if it's an actor we don't know, then it allows the voiceover, the words themselves, to carry even a more sort of pure weight to them, I think. Um, and it also ties into the fact that in war, you know, all the grunts are the same, whether they're played by a major star or not. As John C. Reilly says at one point, it doesn't matter who you are, how tough you are. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to get hit. So there's that. I think the blend of voiceovers in this film is really fascinating because some of them are completely connected to the character. We're looking at them as they're thinking what we're hearing. And then there are other voiceovers where we hear voices we recognize from the characters, but they're disassociated from what we're looking at on the screen. And then there are voiceovers like Smith's at the beginning and the end, which are completely disassociated from any character. They're omniscient. It's like the voice of God. He has a great voice, by the way. I can see why Malick wanted to use him. Another thing that really fascinated me about the voiceover was how they evolve from the way Malick uses them in Badlands to Days of Heaven to The Thin Red Line. In Badlands, the voiceover is more narrative and expository than inner monologue. It's both, but it's relaying what's happening or what has just happened at any given moment. In Days of Heaven, I would say it's still grounded more in the narrative, but it veers more into inner monologue than Badlands did. And in The Thin Red Line, it goes all in on inner monologue. There's zero exposition. There's no voiceover that says, then we went and took this hill, or then this happened, then that happened. And so that seems to me a very interesting progression for an artist who's interested in using voiceover in this way, to just go more and more abstract, deeper, greater, whatever the right wording is for that. And maybe that's why his films after Thin Red Line and New World and Tree of Life, they get more and more abstract, and they have less of a framework of genre, for example, that the first three films had. He's just going deeper. He's going more abstract as his career goes on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he definitely is pushing. He's definitely, and I think that you can even see that in the progress of the movie, where, the attack on the pillbox and the first attack, the first assault, the disastrous attacks where they're getting massacred. If somebody said this isn't a Terrence Malick film, you might say, oh, okay. And then you get that attack on the Japanese bivouac, and the editing is so quick on that, and you have like a Japanese soldier grabbing a suicide bombing into a trench, and the flashes of shots, the movement of the camera, just absolutely extraordinarily kinetic, and it's like you're watching tiles of a mosaic and you're trying to pick out the picture, and he is doing, and so he's doing that even as the film progresses. He's doing that with each individual film, but even as the film progresses, I fear there's a maturation and there's an evolution in how he's making the film. And then with the voiceovers, there's also something else which I'd like to point out, which I think is sometimes, I would said earlier that he isn't necessarily as heavily, obviously a cinephile as somebody like Scorsese, but he is very much a reader, and I feel that in those voiceovers there are so many echoes from literature which almost make me feel like he's saying this is also the great American novel. It is James Jones, but it's also John Steinbeck, because you have this, the Tom Joad speech, are we all one great soul? You have Sean Penn saying, are we I'm just in a box, and that's from Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, which John Huston would film, but obviously first and foremost the novella. So you have these large philosophical questions, but you have these bits of American literature that are coming together as well, and it's just so dense and rich, and yet at the same time incredibly watchable, you can immerse yourself in it, and just it will take you where you go. Finally, Wit, he is the actor who's going to play Christ, and after this film, there has been some communication between Mel Gibson and Terrence Malick in terms of the New World as well, in terms of casting. There's someone from the New World goes on to appear in Apocalypto, the Mel Gibson film. So I'm quite sure that Jim Caviezel gets the job in The Passion because of Thin Red Line.
Interesting.
And this feels like a rehearsal for the Christ character because he he is that character. He gives, in fact, I think this is a better version of the Christ character. It's much more subtle and much more,
I
much
was about
less.
to say.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
not quite as anti-Semitic, let's say. But yeah, let's leave that hot potato. But he sacrifices himself for the good of the company. He takes the Japanese in the wrong direction, knowing full well. And I love the way he sort of returns to his childhood when he's doing that. He sort of, it's almost like joyful. He's like hooting and hollering and calling them like some sort of Huckleberry Finn character, having a trick. And again, another character from American literature that sort of, it's just like sprinkled. If you're listening to this on an audio podcast, I did a gesture suggesting sprinkling. Yeah. So what I mean, I find that intensely moving, that final scene. And also because, again, defying expectation, the bloodthirsty Japanese of so many racist propaganda, the Japanese soldier actually says, okay, put down your weapon. You're surrounded. We can take you prisoner. You don't have to do this. And Caviezel decides, I don't want to be captured, and forces them to kill him.
Yes. And, it also occurred to me when I saw it again the other day, Jim Caviezel, Wit never shows fear throughout the film. Everyone else is terrified around him, but we never see it in his face, not really. And at the very end, when he's about to die, that's when he comes closest. But even then, I don't even know if I'd call it fear so much as resignation to what's about to happen. But you could argue it's a little bit of fear, but that helps make him even more Christ-like, God-like through the film. Someone who is above all of that, feeling scared, and it it's something that we just sort of glean as we watch the film. It's never spelled out. I mean, Malick never spells things out. But it's a very powerful end for Private Wit, that's for sure.
I also love the fact that it will take us back to him being AWOL.
Yes.
You know. And we've already had like a taste of that earlier, where he goes back to he visits another village, and suddenly he sees they've got disease, and they do fight amongst themselves, and there is poverty, and his ideal was never true. And if you're very attentive at the very beginning, when he's saying the children never fight, the woman actually says to him, "Oh, they fight all the time." And he just doesn't listen. He's like, no, they don't fight. Trust me. Me as an American tourist, I can tell you that my 5-minute knowledge of what's happening is the right one.
I just realized too that one thing he says to that woman in the opening scene is he's asked if the child is afraid of him. Is he afraid of me? And she goes, yes, a little. And there's another point in the middle of the film where he also is asking someone if they're afraid of him, but I can't remember now exactly where it is, but it does happen. So even though he is not registering fear, he seems to be perplexed as to why other people, he worries about other people being scared of him, even though he doesn't feel fear. So I don't know what that means, but it's something that I noticed this time.
Yeah, he's almost scared that he intimidates Sean Penn as well. It's almost like it's what's driving you nuts about me, and that dialogue that they have in the sort of
House,
house, which is such a sort of Malick a landscape, if you like, the house that you're simultaneously inside and outside at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great scene. I mean, all the scenes between Caviezel and Penn are riveting. And they progress throughout the film. They grow. They become more philosophical. They just get deeper.
Mm.
Maybe that's partly because we get to know the characters more as the film goes on too, and so we have a different relationship to them as those scenes come about.
What do you think the Thin Red Line's legacy is in terms of war films?
Its legacy, I mean, I'm sure that filmmakers revere this film as they revere Malick. Um, I think anyone making a war movie is going to be awed by the film on its level of craft. But Malick is he has such a unique point of view, such a unique vision that it's not gonna, this film did not result in other Thin Red Lines being made because who else could make them? However,
Five seasons in a movie.
well, Saving Private Ryan did spark a glut of combat movies made in the years to follow. Now, you could say, well, maybe Thin Red Line contributed to that. I don't think so because
No.
it's the traditional combat experience that audiences get from Saving Private Ryan, which most comes out in the war movies that follow. Black Hawk Down, and there's so many examples. Um, Thin Red Line I think its legacy is certainly more among filmmakers and cinephiles than it is among, well, for lack of a better word, regular audiences who still know Saving Private Ryan. How did the two films do at the box office? I mean, was Saving Private Ryan a far bigger hit, or
Yeah,
was it not
yeah.
that different?
Yeah, I mean, Thin Red Line did pretty much the standard fare for Malick, which was kind of broke even and eventually made back money with things like ancillary sales and whatnot. Um, Certainly, it wasn't like a big blockbuster, but I think. I mean, one thing I would add in terms of the legacy thing, not in terms of necessarily the genre of war films, but in the industry, it was evidence that Malick could make a movie on budget and on time, and can handle, a movie of this size, and it looked like a movie, and it did all those things. And he wasn't a Cimino. He wasn't someone who you weren't ever sure if you could trust him to deliver. For that matter, of that generation of filmmakers, there were quite a few of his contemporaries who were really still struggling at this point. I mean, even, arguably Francis Ford Coppola, uh, never, William Friedkin, they never really got back to the status that they had once enjoyed. Whereas, despite having that huge break, Malick with this kind of continued a progress that seemed like undisturbed by, the details of popularity or box office. He just, went on and made The New World and then The Tree of Life, which is arguably just one of his most profound and
Yeah.
frankly miraculous achievements. I mean, how that film ever got made is beyond me, but I'm so glad it did.
Um, this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but one thing I wanted to mention was the use of the movie stars who pop up throughout the film in these very brief roles, John Travolta, George Clooney, and the like. I love this at the end when we see George Clooney addressing the troops. We zero in on Sean Penn, and he gets a little voiceover there, and he says, "They just keep coming, one after another." And it's like he's talking about movie stars. These big Hollywood stars keep coming to this movie one after the other, and he rolls his eyes.
I think I think the funny thing is when I watched that originally, Clooney was in the first blush of his sort of ER movie fame, ER post ER fame, and there was a real sense that he stuck out like a sore thumb. That it was like, oh God, that's really late in the movie to be. We must have at least another hour left if George Clooney's turning up.
Exactly.
But nowadays, when I watch it, it really works because it's like, yeah, you've got the captain from Central Casting. This guy's turned up
Yes.
and he's Hollywood clean and he's ready to go. And he hasn't got the dirtiness or the, ordinariness of the other men. Hollywood, just in the same way that Whit's grave is in the jungle and is messy and is going to be overgrown and devoured by the jungle in a matter of months. So, and then you have the cemetery, which is sprinklers and gravel and everything and beautiful lawns. That it's almost like you've got that version of the army, and now you've got the Hollywood version of the army has turned up. Yeah, so it kind of works for me now. I mean, interestingly, he wanted to cut Clooney, but that was one character he ended up having to keep, not because of, well, the reason was because when he finally decided I want to cut him, the trailer had already been released, and all the advertising had already been released, and it was like, right. But the idea would have been that you would have cut from Whit's grave to the graveyard with them walking past, and that would have given you that, and then they're getting on the boat and they're going to do it all over again with the terrifying fact. But I like it as it is. I'm not going to complain.
Another thing that we didn't touch on was the flashbacks to the wife back home, which come through the film. Is that Ben Chaplin's?
Yes, yeah,
yeah. And I could see how they would frustrate some people watching the film, expecting Saving Private Ryan when we're in the middle of combat, and suddenly we're watching this luxurious, beautiful image of a beautiful girl back home on a swing, on a very green, grassy yard.
It's Miranda Otto as well, who will appear in like Lord of the Rings as one of the sort of the riders of Rohan Princess.
Well, I think those scenes work really well, and it's similar to other things we've talked about, where you just get a sense of human connection, of the idea that humans can exist harmoniously and can be beautifully connected like they are in the Melanesian village. This, we can with women like Miranda Otto. And when I see the flashbacks, I'm not really seeing that character and his wife so much as I'm seeing any two people whose souls are connected in love. And like we're seeing something that Malick and all the voiceovers are sort of rapturously wondering about. Where does it come from? Where does this connection, this feeling of connection come from? And it's just another example of how surface plot sort of gives way to a deeper, more objective look at the human condition, at least for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it's a rare moment where we step outside of the island when the only other example of that happening is when Whit describes his youth and the death of his mother.
Yes.
And you suddenly go to the fields and you go to the bedroom and it becomes sort of like a dance as well. That even that scene it becomes a scene of gesture, and it's not a scene of photographed memory like a flashback usually is a dance or a series of gestures which are the memory of the person who's remembering them. They're reconstructed. They're not. So like when you see her on the swing, or you see them in bed together, their lovemaking is sort of like a strange ballet. It's not. It's really theatrical. It's not in any way. They're not having sex. There's not a sense there you're watching them going, okay, they're really getting it on now. It's daringly artful, and then of course when he gets the Dear John letter that we've already referred to, you start wondering, was it always the other guy? Was it Ben Chaplin in the other memories, or was it always another guy? And that's obviously what Ben Chaplin would probably be thinking as well. He's so good in this as well. He's just he had a very small role, and he didn't think he was going to, and he was another example of, he's a British actor. He doesn't think he really particularly fits in here with all these other guys who are not having to work on their accents. And Malick just took a liking to him and grew his role subsequently. So,
Yeah, it's interesting.
so for
Oh.
every Adrian Brody, there's a Ben Chaplin.
True. What you were saying about how their scenes of lovemaking are sort of theatrical and balletic, I think that's a really good point because to me it's not that he's showing some specific story that's happening in the flashbacks. It's a sensory approach. He's just wanting to give us this sensual feeling of this woman, his connection to her, the sense of touch, something that we can all,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah,
Fingertips on a back, you know. That's
exactly.
I'm not, you know, what do you miss when you're away from someone you love? It's not excuse me for being gross. It's not gross or explicit. It's not penetrative sex or orgasms. It's a hand on your neck or a hand on your arm. It's that warmth of
Yeah.
closeness. And also, I think there's an element of innocence to it in the fact that you see her on a swing and it's like childlike.
Yeah.
It's like wit running off and whooping to the soldiers. There's an element of like, why don't we just go back to being kids again, you know? And that doesn't necessarily mean being sexless or anything like that. We can still have all that, but there's a, you know, that movement and that joy and that splendor is available to us if we'd only stop killing each other for no particular reason.
I think that oftentimes in a war movie, when there are flashbacks or cutaways to scenes removed from the combat situation, it lessens the power of the movie overall because it ceases to be a war movie in those scenes. Flashing back to the mainland, remembering, showing us the backstory of a character and his wife or whatever, in a more traditional way. In the Thin Red Line, that does not happen. I don't think I still feel immersed in the moment of him on this island in World War II. Yeah, I'm just going in. We're going inside him to a degree that sort of I don't know, and it enhances our understanding of him at this moment in the war. She's the one who keeps him going, and this feeling is what he wants to get back to. But we're not removed from the war. We're still in it, even though we're seeing images that are removed from the war. That's very interesting to me.
We never leave his head, do we? We never leave
We
his
never
head.
leave his head. Exactly.
And his head is in the island ultimately. You know, that's where it's physically, geographically located. And what we're seeing is not a real thing that happened here. It's a thing that's happening in his head, which is related to back there, obviously. But yeah, no, that's a very good point. Well, Jeremy, I could talk. I'm
Yeah.
forcing myself to stop, but I realize that our listeners might be thinking, okay, I'm going to go and watch Thin Red Line now, and B, we're recording this on Thanksgiving, and I know you have to go and enjoy the festivities, unless this is something an avoidance technique.
No. No. I still have a few hours to get there.
Right, great. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure and joy talking about this movie with you.
Likewise, it's an honor to be on your show again. Thank you. I listen religiously.